Joshua Maloney served in the Iraq War in the 1st Cavalry Division, where he took part in numerous combat and humanitarian aid missions. He has since gone on to advocate for student veterans as president of his local chapter of Student Veterans of America. He is a teacher with the Veterans Yoga Project, a writer, and an avid birdwatcher, credited with the first bald eagle sighting on Cape Cod in over a century. He's also a great friend of mine. We've edited each other's work and collaborated on a feature article about a maritime disaster off the coast of our hometowns, featured in We Are the Mighty. Welcome to Notes from a Ghost, a podcast about stories and the people who tell them. My name is Charlie, and I'm a ghostwriter. I love a good story. I hope you enjoy this one. Josh, thanks for being here.
Charlie, thank you so much to have me. It is a total honor.
We we talk about books pretty much every time we talk, and I think you and I could be co-presidents of the Sebastian Junger fan club. He writes about how for a lot of veterans, the hardest part of going to war is actually coming home. And paradoxically, veterans often miss war. Is that true? And if so, why do you think that is?
I think we miss the skills and the purpose behind those skills that we use downrange or during deployment that keep us alive. And then there's also this culture shift. There's this culture shift of things really mattered when we were in the military. Everything that we did mattered. If we forgot something, that was very important. And in civilian life, a lot of times it's just day-to-day muck. It's kind of like paying bills and answering phone calls. It just doesn't really feel like it matters. So skills downrange, like having buddies, having battle buddies, people that you trust your life with, ends up back home looking like withdrawal because we don't want to make those connections because we just don't have that trust for those people. So we often look back at that better time when our skills had that purpose. Another thing is accountability. You can't forget anything in combat. I was more afraid of some NCOs than I was of if I lose something, what if I don't have it? Like, no, I was legit more afraid that an NCO was going to be like, you're an idiot. You're going to get us all killed. So accountability is super important. And in the civilian side, we become controlling. And we continue to look at those skills that are coming up in our life of us controlling and us being withdrawn from people and say, yeah, but this kept us alive. This mattered. And I think we miss that. And Sebastian Junger, through all of his books, has an essence of that. And he's able to, even with The Perfect Storm, just bring those people that were doing a seemingly small task of just fishing that happens all the time and bringing a purpose to it and showing how dangerous and scary and what that was like for them. And I think a lot of vets relate with that.
What helped you with that culture adjustment, and what have you found to replace that now?
Um, it took me a long, long time to come back. I deployed in 2009. I got out of the army in 2011. And within a couple months, I became a police officer in my local town. And there's pretty much no comparison between like those buddies. Like I had buddies in the army that I did trust my life upon. I do trust them. They trust me. It's well known. In the police department, it's just not like that. Like, no, I'm leaving at 4. My shift's over and I'm fucking out of here. So the police department kind of helped me stay in that place of there's still a reason for me to have targeted aggression, tactical awareness. There's still a reason for me to be lethally armed all the time, which a lot of veterans struggle with. So that almost helped me keep a lot of those skills alive, which helped me not come home. It almost helped me stay in this place of, yeah, but the trauma's still going on. Like we're still getting more and more. And it was really once I stopped that job, um, and I stopped it to help veterans. Honestly, I took a job as a veteran employment representative for the state of Massachusetts, and I thought it was going to be great, and all my problems were going to go away. And it turned out that as soon as I stopped, I still had all of these traumatic memories that were even coming up even more. A lot of therapy kind of brought me to nature. And nature is the thing that has helped me through all of this. I took a walk before this podcast we're doing here, and no matter what, no matter where I am, the birds, the nature, the trees, just being around it, it's able to bring me back into my own body, check in on myself, which the PTSD is doing the opposite, saying stop noticing everything. The chickadees and the trees are just saying, hey, notice me, check me out.
And when you discovered birding, was that instantaneous? Was it like love at first sight? You'd found your thing, or was it kind of a slow burn?
I think it was a little slower. Um, I really started my birding journey after I went to this place called Home Base. They're in Boston, and they offer therapy to veterans and their family members. And they're run by Mass General Hospital, so they have some really incredible resources. I was working as a mechanic at the time, which, if you know me, is just like, sitting in a mechanic bay, not moving around too much is just like super triggering. It's just the worst. And through the therapy, they started saying, okay, well, when are you happy? When are you? And I couldn't figure anything out. I'm like, I'm fucking never happy. Like everything I do sucks. Like I feel suicidal constantly. I'm just always sad. I'm never happy. And then I was able to say, well, I guess I'm kind of happy when I'm in the woods. And they were like, there it is. There's the thing. You're gonna go in the woods. It's nature. And quit the mechanic job, and I started volunteering for the Audubon, the Mass Audubon. We're the only state that has their own organization for the Audubon. And that's really where the slow burn began. At first, I was almost blown away by how ridiculous that thought was. That birding somehow was going to help with my memories. And I'd see the people going nuts over birds, and I'm like, "What is your deal? Like, it's just a fucking bird. It's just flying. Like, they're just there. Who cares?" And being with people who really know the birds and know when to look up and say, that's an interesting bird. That's a peregrine falcon. Like, watch that. Watch what it does. Those moments are the ones that really connected me with bird, because then I'm looking and I'm just in awe, and I just can't believe it. And since those moments, I've had countless moments where I've seen birds and I'm just in awe. I was in awe. I allowed myself to feel awe over those chickadees this morning. Like, yeah, they're tiny little birds that most people think nothing of, but I think that they're just so special. They make such pretty sounds. They're aggressive as all hell. They fucking hate people, absolutely hate people. That's why they're saying, hey, look at me. They're really saying, beat it. I'm trying to eat. And it's really, birding is the thing that constantly brings me back. And I love it. And it gets more and more and more interesting.
Tell me about when you saw the eagle, because that sounds like a high
Yeah,
point in your journey as a birder.
yeah, for sure. Um, Growing up, I never saw an eagle on the Cape, and everybody said that there just weren't any, and that's true. The last eagle nested on Cape Cod in 1905, and then it left, and there hasn't been an eagle nest since, up until 2020. So I was volunteering at the Audubon at the time, and still hadn't seen any eagles. And then I started seeing, just these massive birds up in the sky. And they'd be like, you know, thousands of feet up seemingly, but they just looked big. And a couple times I would take my cell phone camera and I'd point it up and I'd zoom in and I'd send that picture to my bird guy, Chris Walls, that you actually sat at table at my wedding at, the
Oh,
bird
right.
guy.
Yeah.
I used to send him the photos, and in hindsight, it's so silly because it would be like, you know, 10 times zoomed in, and then I'd crop in on top of that, and it would just be like a bright white background with like a blur in it. And I'd be like, "Is this an eagle?" And he'd be like, "I I don't know. I don't even know if that's a bird." But I started having those moments where I started looking at seeing what I thought could be eagles. And then I would have my binoculars, and then a couple times I said, "No, that's a fucking eagle. White head, white tail, that's an eagle, no doubt about it." And they were all kind of in the Marston's Mills area of where I live. That's a town on Cape Cod, or a village on Cape Cod. And one time I was driving down a road, and 10 feet over my car, just in front of my vehicle, I just saw 100% it was an eagle. Um, Something that I feel like the trauma has given me the ability to do is like remember images very well. Um, after something traumatic would happen for a couple months, sometimes longer, um, the images of some lots of times people or mutilated bodies or whatever it may be would just flash like on the back of my eyelids, and I would see it. And that's obviously a very jarring experience, and it's not very helpful when I'm standing in line at Dunkin' Donuts or whatever I'm doing. But in the same manner, sometimes I only see a bird for a second or less than a second, and I get that same type of imprint, that same type of memory. So the bird flies by and it's gone, and I can still have like a picture of it inside of my mind. So that day, that bird flew over me, and I had that imprint, white tail, white head, as big as a fucking Volkswagen. Like, that's an eagle. 10 out of 10. No way. Um, when I was a police officer before that, I would have never stopped. I wouldn't have even seen it. It could have been um, the most exotic bird in the world, and I wouldn't have even considered stopping. And I freaking slammed on my brakes that day, and I turned around, um, and it was also carrying nest building materials. So in that image that I had of it, I was like, it had um, grass. It had like a whole bunch of grass out of its massive talons. And I learned from Chris Walls, my bird guy, with robins, that birds only carry nest building materials for one reason. There's no reason that they would do it unless they're building a nest. They will never, ever, ever pick stuff up and bring it around for no reason, because that bird will die because it's wasting its resources. Should be looking for food, should be building a nest. So I knew the area very well, and I pretty much formulated a hypothesis that I think it's on this island over there. That's what I think. And I looked around a little that day. I couldn't find anything, and then I kayaked out on the lake, and holy shit, there was an eagle's nest out there. I had never seen one before, but it was just this massive, massive, probably 8 feet tall, 6 feet across, just massive structure way up in a pine tree. And I'm like, that's got to be an eagle's nest, right? I mean, I got no idea, but it's got to be. And then a fucking eagle flew down and landed on top of the thing, and another eagle poked its head out. And I'm like, holy shit, that's an eagle's nest. Um, and I knew that eagles had not nested on Cape Cod in a very long time. So I knew it was quite the find. Um, I told my people at the Audubon about it, and they said, "No, we really don't think that there's an eagle's nest in Marston's Mills. It doesn't seem like that would happen." I'm like, "I saw it," and they're like, "Yeah, it's probably something else." And a couple days later, I bought a camera from somebody in the Coast Guard serving on Joint Base Cape Cod. It was just a used Nikon. I went out there. Um, I actually climbed a tree on the other side of the island, or so on the shore. I climbed a tree, went way up there so that I was in line height wise with the nest. It's probably 30 feet up in this tree. This was before I was a professional tree climber. I had no business going up there. I really should not have. And I got all the way up there and I snagged hundreds of photos, just click, 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 nonstop. I didn't see anything. And when I went home that day, I zoomed in, cropped in a bunch of the photos, and there was a little eaglet just sitting there looking right at me, seemingly. It was probably 400, 500, 600 feet away from the nest at the time. It was quite amazing. And I sent that photo to Mass Wildlife. They're the individuals that track the eagle population and all that stuff. And they said, "Oh, great, we didn't know. We're going to go tag that eaglet," and they did. It was quite the life-changing experience for me. And that was really when I was already a birder before that, but that really felt like um almost like some type of message.
Mm.
Um because I found it on Memorial Day, and I was really I was really fucking bummed out. I was just thinking about people that died in combat, and having all these thoughts that are typical for veterans and survivor guilt, that if they were alive and it was me that died, they'd be doing more with their lives. Um, and here I am, not fucking working. I volunteer at a bird sanctuary. Like I don't feel so hot about myself. And I was just kicking myself. And I was like, no, I got to go out there. This is what I got to do. This is the right thing to do. It's Memorial Day. This is something I could do for myself and, you know, do it for them. And I found it that day. And, that was powerful to me.
And as you integrated some of those experiences and um, that healing continued, you ended up having the opportunity to work with veterans, with uh, families of veterans. And I remember a conversation you and I had about my dad and his experiences, and you said something that's so obvious, but I'd never thought about it before, and that is that veterans' families actually outnumber veterans just by simple math. Based on your experience and your work, what would you suggest that a veteran's family can do to be helpful for someone who's where you were a number of years ago when you were coming home and it wasn't going so great?
Um, I'd say to be there, but also give space. There's not like a handbook for PTSD or for coming home. The VA does very well, but some vets don't get the care that they need, or they don't think that they can need the care that they need. So nobody tells you what to expect. Nobody tells you this is what might happen. This is what a flashback is. I only knew what a flashback was from reading books when I was a kid. Often they were fiction. So they're these really typically exaggerated stories of like the worst flashback imaginable. But turns out I was having flashbacks in parking lots. I got hit by a mortar in Mosul, Iraq, in a more or less what would be a parking lot. And for years, I'd get into, as soon as I got into my car, I would I would just become afraid. I was scared. There was no link there to mortars. There was no, the frontal cortex was not on. This is coming from the amygdala, this is the fear center of the brain shutting down the thinking center, just saying we got to get the fuck out of here right now. And typically I'd be sitting in a parking lot perfectly safe, nothing's going on, nothing's scary, and I'm grabbing my seat. Maybe I'm with my wife, maybe I'm with a family member, and I'm trying to figure out why they don't understand how afraid I am right now. And I'm like, we need to go. And they're like, well, what's going on? Like, we just need to leave. And I wasn't able to articulate those issues that I was having. And that could be tough for the family member because they don't under understand what the evidence isn't there. I don't see it. I see it now that I've done lots of therapy, and I'm like, I was freaking out about the mortar. That's so obvious now. But in the moment, I couldn't have put two and two together. That's part of the PTSD, is that we detach from what we're thinking. So really just to be there and then ask questions like what is the threat? Where's the enemy? And that, in my experience, helps turn the mind back on to be like, okay, wait, let me think about that. What is the threat? Huh. What is it? Hmm. It's a mortar? Is that what it is? We're in fucking Boston at Shaw's. Like, I don't think that that's very likely. And then the brain starts coming back on, and then I'm able to, oh, okay, let me use some of my skills now. Let me start breathing because I'm at like a 9 right now. And in the situation does not match a 9. So maybe allowing that veteran to deal with that. And it sucks because it often looks controlling because it's, we need to leave right now. We need to get out of here. And some people are like, I can do whatever I want. Like, I'm gonna go through my stuff and put the groceries away, right? Like, I'm not just gonna throw them in the back seat because there's no reason for us to rush. And likewise, I've had times where um, I just absolutely was convinced that my dog was injured. Um, he got hit by a car, and there was no evidence there. The dog was fine. He was right in front of me. And I'm just like, no, he's hurt. And my wife is like, she was such an angel that day. Like, wait, she's ready to go. She's like, yeah, let's get in the car and take him. He looks fine to me though. And I'm like, no, he's definitely hurt. We gotta bring him. And he's like wagging his tail and jumping up and down. And that's just, the frontal core is just totally shut down. Fear center, the amygdala is taken over, some type of trigger somewhere in there. I don't even know what it was. Sometimes it's never apparent and I never figure out because I got a lot of trauma. The trauma from police, childhood, trauma from the war. Like, there's a lot of shit. And for me, I don't have to figure out what it is. I used to have to. So I'd stay in these weird patterns in my head searching for what the threat is. It's like, well, there is no threat, right? It's some grandiose threat from years ago, and it's no big deal.
Hmm. On the other side of that coin, is there something veterans need to know about civilian life that either you had to learn the hard way or that when you learned it, it was a big reveal that you kind of wish you'd known sooner?
Yeah, I think two things here. One, our skills and experience do not neatly transfer over to the civilian world. You could be a combat medic with 20 years of experience and a 19-year-old with a 6-month CNA degree is better than you in every way on a resume. And that sucks. Um, we often get so we're so proud of our service as we should be. So sometimes we want to say that, we led a platoon through combat, or that we signed for millions of dollars worth of equipment. And we think that that's because it's very important, because we know if we lose any of that shit, like the army's going to figure it out. They're just going to take it out of our paycheck for the next 20 years or whatever it may be. So it's tough that that stuff doesn't transfer over. As a drill sergeant, I supervise 200 people every day, all day, all the questions, all the stuff, all the cadence. And for the last 2 years, I've been working my way up to foreman, supervising 3 people. And that can be kind of feel like a bummer almost, because we have done more and we want to do more. And the other thing, especially being from Massachusetts, I think states like Texas have more understanding and support for veterans and military. And states like Massachusetts just really don't understand quite as much. So people will say the worst things to you. Maybe they're well intended, but they'll walk right up to you and say terrible things. I've had men walk up to me and say, "I'm so sorry that you had to go over there and have all of your friends die." It's like I don't even know what to say to, like, where are you conversationally that that's what you're just gonna say to a young man? Like that's fucking insane.
I have one last like war question, then we can move on to better topics.
Yeah.
But I remember when I was working on my dad's book. I think it had just come out, and I was talking to someone, again, very well-intentioned
Mm,
person, and you know this story already, but I was talking to someone about the project and just how incredible it was to spend all this time with my
mm,
dad, and especially as he's getting older, and we had conversations we never would have had otherwise, and it was really wonderful for both of us, even though it was tough, and a lot of those conversations were really tough.
mm.
And she said, and it you must have really helped both of you put all the abuse behind you. And I was like, excuse me? Like, what, my father has never laid a hand on me.
Mm,
What on earth are you talking about? I, and she's like, oh, well, I thought
mm,
that veterans abuse their kids generally. And I mean, I was like, I
yeah.
didn't, but I remember I called you, like kind of immediately after that
Mhm.
happened, because you were the only person who would connect those dots and know exactly kind of why that had
Yeah.
happened, why somebody would assume that. I was really confused. Um,
It's a
I,
total lack of understanding. They're totally disconnected.
and weirdly thinking that that was some insight. And
That was something nice to say.
yeah,
And
yeah.
and you're kind of it's kind of like you don't know that my friends died. Lots of people had experiences in the military that were just positive. And
Mhm.
they weren't on the front lines and nobody died, and it went well. So for somebody to assume that your friends died or that you're going to abuse your kids, another big one is that you're doing it for oil.
Mm.
I've had a lot of people do that, assume that I joined because I'm a hardcore Republican and I just want to drill for oil more. I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, I don't even know you.
Yeah, we had a lot of that with my, not a lot, but I mean, because part of my dad's book is that he worked in politics. So if you keep reading, you'll know like he
Mm,
worked for President Kennedy, who's a Democrat. But there were people on kind of both sides of politics who assumed they knew
hmm.
everything about his politics based on the
Yep.
fact that he was in the Marine Corps.
Yep. Yeah, a lot of Republicans assume that I'm a Republican, and a lot of Democrats assume that I'm a Republican. So it can be tough. I'm just always pigeonholed. So I'm like defending myself from both sides.
And for someone in the military, whether we're talking combat or any other role, that's like the last thing on anyone's mind, from what I understand.
Yeah, yeah, it sucks. Um, and a lot of times the policies that the president's saying are simply not being enacted on the front lines. They're just we're finding ways around it. So it's like, who gives a shit? It gets to the point that it almost seems like nothing that we do actually matters. So who fucking cares?
You didn't find those weapons of mass destruction, in other words.
No, 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 we didn't quite get to those.
But then again, nobody was talking about that either.
Nobody in our unit, we were so apolitical. It was really nice. The army does it like nowhere else, where it's like, okay, we're gonna support whoever the president is. Doesn't fucking matter. I joined under Bush, and then I was going to get stop lost, which basically means that, okay, your time is up in March, but you're deploying in January, so you're going for the whole deployment. You don't get out in March anymore. It was just a great way to get soldiers to stay in longer, and it was forced. You didn't have a way out of that. And Obama got elected, and one of the first things that he did was, we're getting rid of that rule. And I didn't get deployed a second time, very thankfully.
Thanks, Obama.
Yep.
Um, in addition to your experience in combat that you described, you served in probably one of the most misunderstood jobs in the military. You were a drill sergeant. And I think for most people in popular culture, that is just a lot of screaming. And
Mm.
there has to be more to it than that. I'm curious, like, what did you learn about teaching and learning in that job, and what did you learn about human nature? I mean, it must be really good people watching.
Mm. It is constant people watching, mostly because they're evolving. They're losing their civilian ways and they're turning into soldiers, and it happens at different paces. Some people day one, they're squared away, top notch. Some people don't ever figure it out, and some people don't figure it out until after basic training. Drill sergeant school was the hardest school that I've ever been to by far. Not physically, but remembering all of that stuff, constantly sounding off. It was really, really hard. Uh, and the reason that we yell is because there's one of us and there's 200 of them. We can't be repeating ourselves 200 times. We need to make sure that everybody hears us. So that's the textbook reason of why we yell. It was really the opposite of movies like Major Payne and Full Metal Jacket. Those movies where it's just indiscriminate yelling. That's more like what I went through to a much lesser extent in 2008. We were called names. We were never hit, but we were called names. We were mass punished. Um, Tons and tons and tons of hazing, just pointless. And the training is, hey, you're going to go to Iraq and you're going to be doing pointless things that you feel like have no meaning and they don't need to be done. So you're going to go sweep the motor pool in the rain so that you know how to do pointless things. And we really got rid of that. I went in 2014, and there were these huge changes going on. That we at the beginning studied like a lot of cultural generational changes and why some of those traditional practices, like just yelling, don't actually help. People don't learn from that. This generation doesn't learn from that. This generation needs purpose, motivation, and direction. That's not to say that people like your father didn't need those things. They just weren't provided. And now, if we're going to ask someone to do something, we really need to provide purpose, motivation, and direction. We used to just be able to say, go do this. And they'd be like, how? They'd be like, private, you better know how to do that. Just go fucking do it. And now it's okay, well, let me give you some direction on how to do this and motivate you. And there was a lot of backlash to that. A lot of NCOs didn't like that, but it was definitely the better way to teach. At the end of the day, you don't want to be the one that's belittling your soldiers. They're not going to work for you as well. Um, Day one pickups. Have you ever heard of a shark attack?
No.
Yeah, so the military people will know what a shark attack is. And day one, when you get picked up, they bring drill sergeants from all over the place. Other units are coming down. It's quite a magical occurrence. And everybody starts coming off of the bus, and they have like two duffel bags and a backpack, just tons of shit. And they start running out of the bus, and the drill sergeants are just all going wild. Just hurry up, hurry up, hurry up, run faster. Um, be about 15 drill sergeants for the 200 soldiers. So it's a very high ratio. And they don't do that anymore. I did that when I was a drill sergeant. It was really a special time. And we don't do that anymore because it really shows that the way that you get things done and communicate with them is through mass fear and punishment. And then when those people become leaders, well, how are they going to get things done? Hey, you fucking idiot, go do it because I said so. I can't believe you're so stupid. So I think it's for the better.
Speaking of learning and shifting gears back to peace and nature, you not only have become a participant in being in nature and observing nature, but you've absolutely thrown yourself into the literature of the natural
Mm.
world and environmental science, and a lot of which was written kind of in your own backyard.
Oh, totally.
Because I think you and I have had a very similar experience of becoming readers, where it wasn't
Mm.
like it certainly wasn't my favorite thing as a kid, and then that all changed one day. Was that your experience?
Yes, that is quite literally how it happened. Um, I was a slow learner when I was a kid, in addition to ADHD or ADD. I was in special classes for reading up until I was in like seventh grade. So I really, really struggled reading. I just couldn't comprehend things that I read. So I had to do a lot of extra work to just try and be at the same level as the other students. So when seventh grade hit, I got out of those classes, and I was smart enough to realize that I didn't have to actually read the things. I could just kind of bullshit my way through a lot of the questions and answers, and as long as I wrote a lot, they would kind of be like, "Oh, well, I'm not going to read all of this. You must have spent a lot of time." So I would just write a whole bunch of fucking shit, and that got me through a lot. It really did. Um, but it wasn't fun. I didn't enjoy it. I have since read some of those books that I read as a child, or read in high school, and have been like, wow, what an astonishing book. Like I can't believe I didn't, I just got Spark Notes on that book and I didn't actually read it. And as I said, as the police officer, my report writing, um, my writing skills really changed. It became very purposeful, but not fun. But grammatical errors and spelling mistakes became very, very, very important. Because if I was doing some type of report and it went to trial, if I said something stupid in there or put some prepositional phrase in the wrong place, then you better bet that that attorney is going to read it in front of everybody and be like, Officer Maloney, what did you mean when you said this? And it's like, well, it was 3 o'clock in the morning and I was on the second half of a double. And yeah, I spelt that word wrong, but it makes you look bad. And a lot of that comes up now for me with editing. Um, and it wasn't until I went to college for like shit the third time. So 2019, good couple of years for me and changing my life around right there. I took a English comp class at Cape Cod Community College, and the teacher really just let us kind of read whatever we wanted. And she let us write reports kind of on whatever we wanted. It was a very broad um, section. And something that she said, Polly Lincoln was her name. She was just amazing. Um, Something that she said was, write about whatever your major is. I was studying um, environmental science, so I thought, well, why don't I read some books about environmental science and see what I think? And like you said earlier, there's a lot of books written about Cape Cod, Eastern Massachusetts, um, hundreds of years old that are just absolutely astonishing. And in that class, I read Henry David Thoreau's Walden, and that changed my life because that is just such an amazing book. It has such an interesting purpose, and it's written so well. And he's just angry. You just feel his emotion, which is really nice. And then I read Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, which is totally different. It's a very scientific book. You're really trying to dissect these super long chemical names, and it's hard. But I was so interested, and she wrote it so well. And I saw how combining science and literature in a book like that could be so beneficial. And after that class, I was nonstop. And 2 years after that, I met you, and I got on your reading list. And some of the best books I've ever read came from that. So you were a big part of, you know, bringing fantastic books, just pipelining them straight to me because it can be, Sebastian Younger. I heard him say one time, like if you're reading a book and you start to get uninterested or like it's just not written well, put it down and stop reading it. And that was huge for me because I used to, I'm mission oriented. I'll never accept defeat. It's like, yeah, but this book sucks. I'm gonna read the whole thing. Really? Like I'm gonna waste the next couple days, and I still find myself doing that. And now, a lot of Audible. I do a lot of Audible because I read when I work often. I'm a very busy fella, and I always have often more than one book going at once, and then I usually read one book on the side.
Those conversations you and I have had about books have added so much to my experience as a reader because, like, the way I've described it to Dominique, like, you're the kind of friend where we probably would have been friends if we had met when we were like 10. And
Hmm.
it's like kind of the same. And I feel like I'll
Yeah,
read a book and then just like I have to call you and talk about it.
yeah, yeah.
And I think if I had come to reading in a way that was totally assignment based and just needed to get good grades and all of that, I think I would have put books in a different place in my life. And it wouldn't feel like an accomplishment to be a reader. And I
Mm,
don't know that I would have that same enthusiasm that you and I share.
yeah. Yeah, the fact that it was hard and that I didn't like it at first has made it so uniquely special for me as an adult because I didn't do this. I never read books through high school or through the army.
You mentioned the writing, and that's a practice that has evolved like rapidly for you in the last couple of years. What does that look like, and what are you working on?
So my writing practice for the most part um, is relatively informal and it's journaling. So Stephen Pressfield, a book on your list that you recommended me, he often talks about how we just kind of need to listen to the muse. And I listen to the muse, and when I have things come up, I will pretty much no matter what I'm doing. If I'm walking in the woods, it often happens in the woods. I come to a complete stop. Sometimes I sit down and I just start journaling. What were those core memories that just popped up? What were those good little nuggets? And I write those down. And a lot of times I never look back at it. It was just, that practice started out of therapy. It would be like if I'm remembering something traumatic, I should just write it down. And then my frontal core can actually look at it and see what it really is. So the journaling is where I get a lot of the information. And then changing from journaling to something that I want to write about is so much easier because typically if I sit down to write, I struggle getting it out, especially about the hard stuff, especially about combat and stuff. I sit down and I'm just like, it's just a blank wall. But if I have all of these notes to go back to when I do formally sit down and I do write, which is relatively often, several times a week, I have this almost endless track of thoughts that I can look back on and edit and compare against things that I wrote 3 years ago. Or say, hey, what was that thing that I said about two paths in the woods? I don't remember. I can just search my Google Notes and there it is. And that makes my whole writing process a lot easier. So yeah, things coming up. I've been working on a memoir about my life for a couple of years now. Um, and it's going to be kind of similar to things that we've spoken about today, finding the eagle, combat. Um, and you've helped me a lot with that. I think it's fair to say that if I hadn't met you through our mutual friend Amber, that I would not be a writer. I still struggle with like the imposter syndrome of calling myself a writer. And you help a lot with that because you're so professional. I mean, that's what you do. You're a ghostwriter. You've written books. Um, so like a huge part of my writing is having someone that I trust look at it and read it. Like you said at the beginning, we read our shit all the time. Sometimes I'm just like, hey, check this thing out that I read. And it's not going to be posted or anything, but what do you think? And that's really nice and a huge part of my reading practice and writing practice.
Yeah, and for the listeners at home, I've read a first draft of Josh's memoir. It's very good. It's there's all sorts of stories I wish we could get into on this episode. I think that one thing about working together as like co-editors, going back to the reading, I know what you like to read and I know what you like
Mm,
about what you read. And oftentimes that's where I really trust you as a reader. So that's where I feel like I always keep you in mind as a great beta reader and bullshit detector for especially that quality control phase of, okay, how does this land? Does this work? Do you like this for the same reasons you like all the other
Mm,
books we've talked about? And I I think it really pays to not only know what what a friend who you trust with your work is like as an editor and what their feedback style is like and their tastes, but
mm.
also to kind of have an understanding for what they're like as a reader. And I think that that's
Yeah.
something that makes me put a lot of trust in your feedback.
And I think another big one is we're both truly looking for the feedback. A lot of times, there's lots of people that I would love if they read my stuff, but I know it's going to be like, wow, that's great. And be like, what did you think though? What would you change? What did you not understand? Everything was amazing. And I get it. They're trying to be nice, but when you read something of mine, I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, that doesn't make sense because I missed something in there. And it's not in like you're wrong. It's obvious you've written books. It's like, hey, there's a lot of fucking words here. And it's pretty easy to miss a couple things, especially if I continue to read it in my own voice. And I like to think I am able to do that with you too, professionally and nicely be like, hey, I just don't get this. And that's the feedback that helps make us better writers. Because if we don't get it, then our readers aren't going to get it.
100%. And our readers aren't going to send a nice note finding a kind way to express that judgment. They might do what you described earlier and just put the book down and you'll never
Right. Yeah.
hear from them
It's not
again.
written. It's garbage, No, it's not worth my time. And that's what I do. So I expect my writing to, facilitate that and to allow people to be like, no, this is good. I appreciate how this is written. It's not confusing. Because some books I read and I'm like, what the fuck is going on? Like I'm just confused.
That's another place where I feel as a reader, having developed late as a reader is actually an
Mm,
asset because my attention span for bad writing is so short. And yeah,
yeah.
I'm out. Like and that is a good thing as an editor, I find.
Mm,
Um Last question for you. You and I have talked a lot about the process of when, and I wish I had met you earlier in the process of working on my dad's book. But one thing that I observed working with him is that talking and writing about the war was really hard, but it was also
mm.
healing, and that's why we kept going. What would be your advice for someone, and it doesn't just have to be a veteran, but somebody who's trying to go there emotionally on a tough subject, whether that's sharing it with family or friends or writing the story down?
For me, and I got this from my therapy, it's the journaling. That's what allows me to write about this stuff. I often, if I sit down to write about combat or something traumatic in my life, if that muse isn't there, I'm kind of like I don't make this shit up. I don't think of it. Like it just kind of comes to me. So if I'm able to write small tidbits throughout the day when they do come to me, then at the end of the day or whenever I sit down to actually write, I have evidence there. I have facts that I can work with. But just sitting down and trying to write the whole story is overwhelming. Um, and there's just too much emotion tied to that as soon as my brain starts like really thinking about that, it starts to get muddy in my brain. And it's like the more I try and look at it, the less I can see because the brain's trying to protect me from it. But if I wrote the whole thing down over and over and over again, because that's what I do in my notes. I often write about the same things. Things come to me a little bit differently. Then I have a cachet of writing, and that's my journal. I can just search the journal. And if I don't do it that way, I often find it's incredibly confusing that I go to read it back and I'm like, what the fuck was I talking about? It's written without all sorts of words, and that's because parts of the brain are turned off. And that can be okay. It just requires a lot of editing to be like, hey, what was I actually trying to say here? Because that's not a sentence.
Josh, thank you so much for taking the time. This has been awesome.
Charlie, thank you so much. As always, just a total honor and a privilege to talk to you. I think you are one of my best friends, and I appreciate everything that you do for me.
The appreciation is mutual. All right, thanks for listening. If you have an epic story, I'd love to hear it. You can find me at dailyprose.com or on LinkedIn. My links and Josh's are in the show notes.